Okay, so you sent in this presentation about natural law, and wow, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, it's pretty dense, but really interesting stuff, I think.
For sure. And our listeners are going to love this deep dive. Knowledge, truth, freedom, morality, huge topics. And this presentation ties it all together.
It really makes you question some assumptions, like about systems we often just accept without thinking. Organized religion, chasing money, even things like science taken too far, politics, the whole New Age movement. It argues those can actually make it harder to see reality clearly.
That's what caught my eye, too. Like, there's this whole other way of looking at things, this natural law. And the presentation basically says it's been hidden from us. And that by understanding it, we can unlock, like, more freedom, better lives, all that.
Yeah, and right away the word occult jumps out. But they clarify they don't mean like spooky stuff. It's just hidden, literally from the Latin occultus, meaning hidden from sight, which itself is from oculus, meaning eye.
Okay, so no secret societies or anything like that.
Not in that sense. The point is, this knowledge, this natural law, it's presented as something a select few do know, and that creates a power imbalance.
So the why it's hidden is important. Let's get into that.
Mhm.
Because the presentation implies it's not an accident, right? This concealment is intentional.
Right. And to understand that, we got to look at the bigger picture the presenter lays out.
Yeah.
They start by saying, look, pretty much everyone wants good things in life, happiness, health, peace, freedom, but these don't just magically appear.
So it's not as simple as think positive and it'll come to you.
Exactly. The presentation challenges that whole law of attraction as it's often presented, especially in the New Age space. They argue there are specific requirements built into nature itself for achieving those states.
So those requirements become key. What are they? How do we meet them? That's a big part of what we need to uncover.
And this leads into a really important distinction they make about not knowing. There's nescience, which is just not knowing because the information literally isn't there. Think of trying to find a historical document that's been lost to time.
Okay, so not your fault. You don't know it. It's just not accessible.
Right, but then there's ignorance. And they even pronounce it like ignorance to drive the point home. This is when the information is there, you could know it, but you're choosing not to, whether consciously or not.
Because it's inconvenient, or you don't like what it means, or you already believe something that contradicts it.
Exactly, and the presentation is pretty bold. They say our society is largely plagued by this ignorance. Truth is available, but we're actively overlooking it.
So if we accept that premise, what does that mean for us? If the very knowledge we need to solve problems, to be happier, it's right there, but we're ignoring it, that's a big hurdle.
Huge.
Right.
And it puts the responsibility squarely on us. It's not just about finding the information, but about our willingness to engage with it, even when it's difficult.
Now, this presentation calls itself a master key, a way to unlock those prisons we might feel trapped in. But they're clear. Knowing isn't enough. Action is key.
Yeah, it's that classic idea. Knowledge without action is useless. The presentation gives us the key, but we have to use it to unlock the door, so to speak.
So how do they tie those together? Knowledge, understanding, and then action. What's the relationship there?
Well, they compare knowledge to understanding the lock's mechanism. You got to know how it works to pick it, right?
Yeah.
Understanding is seeing how that lock is keeping you trapped.
Hmm.
But the key is just a tool unless you turn it. Action is using that knowledge to actually break free.
Love the analogy. Now, before we get too deep into solutions, the presentation goes back to basics. What even is truth?
And they're very firm. Truth is objective. It exists outside of our individual opinions or beliefs. It doesn't change based on what we want to be true.
They compare it to a lens or filter. How we see things might differ based on our lens, but the underlying reality is constant.
Right. If I'm colorblind, that doesn't change the actual color of something, just how I perceive it.
Makes sense. But why is this so crucial to understanding natural law? What if we don't grasp this objective truth idea?
Well, natural law itself is presented as this set of objective principles governing reality. If truth is subjective, then these laws are meaningless. They could be whatever anyone wants them to be.
So there needs to be a shared, solid foundation.
Exactly. Otherwise, it all falls apart. And this ties into why they call out solipsism as a dangerous idea. It's the belief that only your own mind is certain, everything else could be an illusion, objective truth is unknowable.
And they say this isn't just some harmless philosophy. They argue it's actually promoted by those in power to keep people ignorant.
The idea being, if you convince people truth is subjective or unknowable, they won't seek it out. They won't question the systems that are controlling them.
So it's a tool to maintain power, to keep people from understanding natural law and potentially breaking free.
Exactly. It creates confusion and leads to inaction.
All right, enough doom and gloom. Let's define this natural law already. What is it, according to the presentation?
It's described as inherent conditions, existing in nature, in reality, in truth, and importantly, not created by humans. They're binding, unchangeable, affect us whether we know them or not.
Okay, so not just the laws of physics or something.
Right, and the presentation makes this interesting connection, linking natural to the ancient Egyptian words neter, meaning spirit, and al, meaning of or related to. So there's this implied spiritual dimension to it.
So it's deeper than just material laws. But then they also call natural law a science. Isn't that a contradiction?
Not necessarily. They say it's a science in the sense that it's a body of knowledge about these immutable laws. And you can use the scientific method, hypothesize, observe, test to understand them.
Ah, so not faith-based,
Yeah.
but based on observation and understanding consequences.
Exactly. And they emphasize your belief in natural law doesn't change how it works. It's like gravity. Whether you believe in it or not, you're still subject to it.
So it's not about what we think is true, but about aligning ourselves with what is true, regardless of our opinions.
Right. You can't just wish away natural law or change it with your mind. It operates independently of our beliefs.
Okay, so if these laws are always at work, where does all the suffering in the world come from?
The presentation says it's self-inflicted. We suffer because we either believe things that are not true or we refuse to accept things that are true.
So, two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, and both lead to problems. Like if you're building a house and you use faulty materials or ignore the blueprints, it's not going to end well.
So understanding truth is crucial, and that brings us to consciousness.
Which they define simply as the ability to recognize patterns and meaning, essentially truth, both within ourselves and in the world.
And this consciousness expresses itself in three ways: thoughts, emotions, and actions.
They use this Trinity analogy. Thoughts are like the Father, creative and neutral. Emotions are the spirit, the feminine energy behind those thoughts. And actions are the male child, how we interact with the world.
Interesting imagery. But why is this trinity so important?
Because it needs to be aligned. If our thoughts aren't based in truth, if our emotions aren't in tune with that, and our actions don't reflect it, that creates disharmony, internally and externally.
Ah, so it's about aligning all those aspects of ourselves with natural law.
Exactly. And that leads to their statement about saving ourselves. They say it comes through knowledge and action, not faith alone. They even quote that line from the Bible, "Know the truth, and the truth will set you free."
Why the emphasis on knowledge over faith?
Because faith without knowledge can be blind, easily manipulated. Understanding natural law gives you a solid foundation to make choices, to not be swayed by false ideas.
And then there's that whole bit about the brain. They talk about how being too left brain dominant can lead to seeing the world as random, denying any intelligence behind it, while too much right brain can make you think everything's controlled by God, so your actions don't matter.
The ideal is balance, right? Left brain for logic, understanding the mechanics, right brain for intuition, seeing the interconnectedness.
And that leads to the generative principle, what they call care. The heart, driven by what we care about, is the generator of our experience. What we put our will behind shapes our world. So it's like the engine of change. No matter how much you know, if you don't truly care, you won't take action.
Right, and they call it a lost principle because they argue so many modern systems discourage genuine care, push people toward apathy or self-interest.
Like we've forgotten how important it is to actually care about things.
Yeah, and they make this cool connection between liber, the Latin word for free, and also meaning book, highlighting the importance of reading, gaining knowledge as a path to freedom.
So the more you learn, the more free you become.
In a sense, yeah. Knowledge empowers you to break free from ignorance, to see more possibilities. It's literally liberating.
Now, they point out that natural law isn't new. It's been called different things throughout history. Law of cause and effect, law of attraction, karma, moral law.
Shows it's a universal concept, right? Different cultures, different times, but the core idea is the same. Our actions have consequences. There's an order to the universe.
And a big part of this is morality. They're very clear. Right and wrong are not subjective. They exist objectively in nature. And they actually use the term Satanism for believing otherwise.
Yeah, strong language for sure. They define morality as understanding the difference between right and wrong actions, and common sense as actually knowing that difference.
So how do they define right and wrong?
Simple. Wrongdoing, or evil, is causing harm to another being or their property. All forms of it are considered theft, whether it's stealing physically, hurting someone, or even deceiving them.
And a right is anything that doesn't cause that kind of harm.
Exactly. So it boils down to don't steal in the broadest sense. Don't violate someone's rights, their body, their possessions, their freedom.
And then they say you can't delegate a wrong. Just because a government makes a law doesn't make it right if it still violates natural law.
Right. Authority doesn't change the moral status of an action.
Huh.
They use taxation and prohibition as examples. Taxation being theft because you're taking someone's labor without their consent.
And prohibition being wrong because it violates your right to control your own body.
Exactly. Consistent application of the principle, even if it leads to conclusions that challenge the status quo.
But they also strongly defend the right to self-defense, using force to protect yourself from harm.
Which makes sense, right? If the core principle is non-aggression, then you have the right to stop someone who's violating that.
So those two concepts, non-aggression and self-defense, become the two pillars of enlightenment.
The sacred feminine and masculine principles, they call them, both essential for a balanced understanding.
And it all goes back to that core idea. Don't steal. Respect property rights, broadly defined. Your body, your labor, your freedom.
It's surprisingly simple, but it has huge implications. Most conflict, they argue, comes from violating this principle.
Now, what about conscience? They define it as more than just a feeling. It's common sense knowledge of the difference between right and wrong, according to natural law.
So it's not just about knowing, but about choosing. Exercising your conscience is actively choosing the right action, even when it's difficult.
And this leads to what they call the law of freedom. More morality equals more freedom. A society that understands and lives by natural law will be more free.
While a society that embraces moral relativism, where anything goes, that leads to control, bondage, eventually slavery.
Because without those clear boundaries, someone will always step in to enforce their own rules.
Yeah, exactly. True freedom requires that internal compass, that shared understanding of what's right and wrong.
And finally, they contrast natural law with man's law, aka government law. Natural law is based on inherent principles, truth. Man's law is based on authority, often enforced through coercion.
Natural law is universal, focused on consequences. Man's law is specific to jurisdictions, relies on fear of punishment.
And they make a pretty bold statement. Believing in the legitimacy of authority is like believing in slavery. True freedom means rejecting the idea that one person can rightfully rule over another.
Which ties into their definition of false religion. Anything that holds back progress binds people's minds. It's not just about traditional religions, but any system that discourages critical thinking, enforces dogma over truth.
So it's about externalizing authority, looking to others for answers, instead of finding them within yourself.
Right. Giving away your power instead of owning your own understanding.
And they say true freedom means embracing even the possibility of chaos. Not fearing it, but seeing it as potential for change.
This fear of chaos, they argue, comes from low consciousness, from not being able to imagine a world without masters.
They call it the death of imagination. We're so used to being controlled, we can't even envision something different.
Which is why they bring up the lost word of Freemasonry. They interpret it as a dual concept. No, asserting your sovereignty, rejecting illegitimate authority, and no, understanding natural law, your rights.
So it's both internal and external. Knowing the truth and having the courage to stand up for it.
Exactly. Knowledge without action is meaningless, but action without knowledge is blind.
And they end by saying that teaching natural law is the great work, helping people understand it, break free from ignorance.
But they're clear. It starts with yourself. You have to embody these principles before you can effectively teach them to others.
Like, be the change you want to see.
Exactly. And they emphasize thinking with both sides of the brain, logic and intuition. Don't just dismiss something because it feels uncomfortable.
They say that's a sign of emotional manipulation. If we're afraid of truth, it's usually because we're avoiding responsibility, lacking self-respect.
And ultimately, they call for a cosmic apology. Humanity recognizing that the authority to create law belongs to natural law itself, not to us.
So instead of trying to impose our will on the world, aligning ourselves with the inherent order of things.
Right. And that path, they argue, leads to freedom, peace, prosperity, while opposing natural law leads to control, enslavement, conflict.
It's a choice, ultimately. What path do we want to walk?
And they end with those quotes from Jefferson, Locke, Bacon, all emphasizing natural law as the foundation of true liberty.
Powerful stuff. So after all that, what stands out to you? What resonates most from this whole natural law framework?
I think the distinction between nescience and ignorance is huge. And that idea of don't steal as the core principle, how it applies to so much more than just physical possessions.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how we interact with each other, with the world, and how often we might be violating those principles without even realizing it.
For sure. This is just the tip of the iceberg, really.
Hmm.
It's worth delving deeper, exploring those resources they mentioned, and applying these concepts to our own lives, seeing how they change our perspective.
Absolutely. It's a journey, not a destination. And it starts with each of us taking responsibility for our understanding and our actions.
So the big question they leave us with is, what path will humanity choose? And what role will each of us play in that?
Big questions indeed. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into natural law.
It's been a pleasure.